Yo, 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 what is going on, guys? I'm back with my week 6 tight end rankings for this week. If you guys have never been here before, my name is Tyler. I'm part of the FF Mediators here on the Face Off Sports Network. So, without further ado, you've already seen the thumb. Let's jump right into my tier 1, and you're going to see the guy that is featured on my graphic here is also the guy on the thumb, and that is Jake Ferguson. Your eyes are not deceiving you, folks. As of right now, Jake Ferguson is my tight end 1 on the week. And I'll tell you the reason why. Okay, so he's the tight end 1 on the season so far. If you need anything other than that, he is playing Carolina's defense this week, which is the 31st against tight ends. And then also, you think, okay, well, he's been involved. He's got a good matchup. How involved has he been? He has been so involved that he actually has 12 catches, not targets, 12 catches more than the next tight end in Trey McBride. He has 41 catches on the year so far out of 48 targets. He does have 3 touchdowns. So those are helping him a little bit, but nothing is changing in this offense, right? We still don't expect CD to be back this week. This past week, he had 7 catches on 9 targets for 49 yards and 2 touchdowns, which could very easily be repeated this week. I wanted to pick out a few different stats from last week that I could focus on this week. And the main one that I kept running into was route percentage, right? So the amount of passing snaps that the offense plays, what's the percentage of how many he is on the field for, right? So out of the Cowboys passing offense, he is on the field 86.1% of the time running routes. And with that, he has got a 1.75 yards per route run. Now, if you know anything about yards per route run, we use that a lot to describe your wide receivers, especially when they come out of college and we're trying to get a measure on where they stack up against others. And so for me, really and truthfully, it's a great number for a tight end, especially for someone who didn't profile to be the best tight end, the best athlete. He's getting targeted. You play him regardless. You'll see my number 2 here is Tyler Warren. The rookie tight end out of Indianapolis is insane. That is no bias in terms of my fandom. He has been just as successful, if not as even more successful than Jake Ferguson. He does play Arizona's defense this week. That's the 22nd ranked defense against tight ends. He had 4 for 4 for 44 yards and a touchdown. Try saying that 5 times fast. And he had an 87.2% route percentage, right? And I found it interesting. I looked at the breakdown of his passing attempts, right? So his slot percentage, he's being used in the slot almost 40% of his snaps, right at 39.7. His wide out split is 14.1%, which is definitely way less, but his inline percentage is 42.9. So he's being used in the slot and in line almost about the same. And his yards per route run is 2.26. That is elite for a tight end, guys. So I have him here at 2, and you'll see I have McBride at 3. He is not far behind. My only thing here, they play against each other. I just have more confidence in the Colts offense right now. Who would have thought I was saying that? Before the season started, I was a well-known hater of Daniel Jones. That apology will be coming soon as long as he continues. And so I put Tyler Warren over Trey McBride because he's just as involved, but I like the offense a little bit better. He has a 91.1% route percentage, which means he's on the field all the time. He's obviously targeted heavily with the second most targets on the season at 29. And then he actually is tied for 5th with the most tackles forced with Laporta. And that's good enough, like I said, for 5th, but he's also got a 1.49 yards per route run. So he's still managing to get you some considerable yardage on each reception, but he's also making guys miss. And I think I mispronounced that before. It's, missed tackles forced, obviously. Genius brain over here, not working after a long day at work. And then last in the tier, I have Tucker Kraft. Now, my love for Tucker Kraft should come as no shock to you if you've kept up with me so far this season. He seems to be, in a way, the most consistent option that the Packers have. Yes, he had the injury the week before the bye last week, which is why he wasn't in the video last week. But he's getting ready to play Cincinnati, who is a 32nd ranked defense. And although they did trade for Joe Flacco, he's not going to help their defense at all. So I have Tucker Craft here in tier one. Out of his route percentage I was talking about before, he's the lowest of this group. He's at 78.1% route percentage. Um, but he has a 2.1 yards per route run. So he kind of balances that out. You can see he has a higher number of yards per route run, even though he's being used a little less on the field. And that's to be contrasted with Luke Musgrave, who's on the field for about 63.6% of the passing snaps that he actually runs a route on. So you can see the tight end utilization for the Packers is pretty astounding. Even though it is outside of Tucker Craft, he's obviously the more favored tight end for the receiving there. Another interesting fact that I found out about Tucker Craft doing my research this week is he has 225 total yards. Of those 225 total yards, 159 have came from yards after catch. So for me, him being a yak monster like that, over half of his yards have come after the catch. That goes to show me that he's athletic enough to be able to make these defenders miss and pick up big yardage afterwards. And they still trust him in the offense, right? A good matchup mixed with all of those compounding factors gives him the last spot in my tier one here this week. Let's move on to tier two. And you're going to see my graphic here as none other than Darren Waller. Now, I went on record last week to say that Darren Waller, I wanted to see more, right? I wanted to see more after that first week in Miami where he had 2 touchdowns on very limited work. And he showed up. And so here he sits in my tier two. You've got Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, and Hunter Henry right above him. And we'll talk a little bit about each one real quick before we get down to Darren Waller here. Laporta, he's going to be in a tough matchup this week against KC. KC's the third best defense against tight ends. But going back to those route percentage numbers, 85.1% route percentage. So he's running the route on 85.1% of their passing plays. And he's being used in the slot 45% of the time. Like I said before, he's 5th in missed tackles forced, and his yards per route run is 2.13. So you can see all of these elite guys, especially these younger guys that I have up here in the top. Most of them have a pretty high yard per route run, and a lot of that I feel like comes from their alignment, right? Whether they're being used in the slot, in the red zone, stuff like that. All of those things kind of contribute to these factors. And I actually called Laporta last week to score a touchdown. If you got to watch the video, you were ahead of that. If not, here you are. You're watching it this week. He ended up with 5 catches for 92 yards and a touchdown last week. So that was good for us to see, give a little bit of hope from Sam Laporta. And then my number 6 tight end here is Dalton Kincaid. He actually has the worst matchup for tight ends in Atlanta this coming week, who was coming off of bye. So this may be a tough game for him, but he's been getting the usage from Josh Allen, and I want a piece of that offense if I can help it. He was 6 for 6 for 108 yards. He's currently the tight end 2 on the season, so you have to play him. He's a 91% route percentage, and I was talking about the alignment changes, right? He is used in the slot 57.4% of the time. That goes to show you how they view him. They view him as a threat. They can split out and make this defense thin. And I think they'll try to target him because they'll have to. He's one of their most consistent weapons. They'll see if they can get James Cook ramped back up this week. And then I've got Hunter Henry. And the reason I have these guys in this order, I just believe in the offense of Buffalo a little bit more than I do New England. We've seen Hunter Henry be a little fluky at times. Last week, kind of considerable in that term. They do play New Orleans, which is 27th. Against tight ends. So that's part of the reason he's here above Waller. He had 2 catches for 46 yards. So not a great week in terms of production last week, but he's still the tight end 4 overall. And a lot of that is floated by touchdowns, but he's got the best matchup out of all of these guys so far this week. So I felt like he had to be kind of here in the lineup. He's 10th as far as average depth of targets. So that's important to see for tight ends as well. A lot of the times those guys are chain movers, but if he's actually 10th in ADOT, that means he's still being used down the field as well. And And then we got to see too, Diggs has been kind of consistent here the last few weeks. Does that continue? Can he continue to put up big numbers? They paid him big in the offseason. We will see if Stephon Diggs can still be the wide receiver one for that team, or if Hunter Henry will have his own weeks where he kind of fills in. But back to the man we started with, Darren Waller for Miami. I'm in at this point. I wanted to watch it another week, and I saw exactly what I needed to see. He is going to be a locked and loaded starter for the rest of the year. He just has a tough matchup against the Chargers defense, who is fifth best against those tight ends. Here's the thing with Waller. Waller was involved very early on, very heavily this past week. He had 5 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown. And really and truthfully, they probably didn't need him too much outside of that. But him getting involved so early means one thing to me, and that means that he has taken over this Jonnu Smith role that he had last year. So Darren Waller stepped into that, especially with Tyreek going down. It is great to see. He's at almost 95% route participation, and his yards per route run is up at 2.8. So, I mean, he is getting the ball consistently at this point, and he's doing everything he can with it to try and get the most fantasy points for you. So, out of all of these guys, right, is there anybody that kind of shocks you? Has anybody stood out so far? Maybe Hunter Henry's a little too high for some people. Waller may be up in tier 1 for most. I totally get that. This is just kind of how I view as far as matchups, usage, and then too, once you kind of get down into these tiers, they're really just kind of looking at how they stack up against each other, right? That's why I kind of pull similar stats. But without any further ado, we're going to jump down to tier 3. Let's continue to compare these guys and see why maybe they're in a tier below what we have now. So, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Travis Kelce is our graphic king this week. He goes up against Detroit. We talked about Laporta earlier, obviously. He finished last week with 7 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. He's right at 90% route participation. And then I mentioned the yards after catch with Tucker Kraft, right? And it's worthy to note, too, that Kelsey's also doing something similar. He has 243 total yards on the season. He's got 142 yards after catch. So Kelsey is not just this guy that, is his own threat. He's going to catch it, fall down. He's not pulling Tyler Lockett's, right, where he falls down before he gets tackled. But he's still athletic enough to have these plays where he's going to get big yardage for you. His yards per route run isn't great. It's probably one of the lowest we've talked about so far at 1.44. But the Chiefs offense looks fantastic. I think they're only going to get better as the year goes on. And so for me, he's still here in tier 3 because I still see him as a tier below those guys before in Kincaid and Henry and even Waller. So you'll notice here I have moved the 2 Cleveland tight ends up from the streamer category last week that I consider that my tier 4. We'll get into those guys in a little bit, but I've moved those guys up. And here's the reason why. Joe Flacco has now been traded to the Bengals, as I said earlier, but both the tight ends caught a touchdown this past week from Dylan Gabriel. And so the past few weeks, I've had Harold Fanning kind of flipped over David Njoku because it looked like the rookie was starting to take over the role a little bit. But then this past week, Njoku came out. He had 6 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown, and Fannin only had 4 catches for 13 yards and a touchdown. So they both were on the field. They were both used, especially in the red zone. Obviously, that's why they both have the touchdown. But I wanted to break down a little bit as to why they're used a little bit differently and maybe give you some insight. So obviously, they both play Pittsburgh this week. They're on the same team. That only makes sense. So as far as percentages goes of the routes, right? I've been talking about that stat. That's one that I focused on this week. David Njoku is on the field running a route for 85.6% of all passing snaps for the Browns. If you had to guess where Harold Fannin is, I'll give you a second. Leave a comment down below as to what you think his percentage would be just based off the eye test, right? I'm giving you enough time to kind of do that now as I'm talking. I just want you to pause the video, do that, and then you can restart here in a second. And I'm going to tell you that Harold Fannin's route participation is 85.3%. A whole 0.3% difference in route participation, that should come as no shock to you. These guys have been used simultaneously and almost identically all year. And so I don't think it necessarily leans one way or the other. We had a trend with Joe Flacco where he was kind of targeting Fannin a little bit more than Njoku. Dylan Gabriel, in the sample size of one game that we had last week, he's got the game where Njoku leads in targets over Fannin. So we will kind of see. I've got my notes over here, just a few more stats. You've got Njoku being in line for almost 55% of his snaps whenever they're passing the ball. He only has a 1.17 yard per out run, so he's definitely the lowest out of this list that you'll hear. Whereas Fannin is 1.35 yards per route run. So a little bit better in terms of efficiency from Fannin being the younger player. He's had a little bit more down the field. And that lends itself to he's been used 43% in the slot. So you kind of get Njoku being the inline tight end, the blocking tight end, which we all expected. And then you get Harold Fannin, who has been out in the slot, been used more as a receiving threat. And Harold Fannin, fun fact, is actually number one in missed tackles forced this year. Got that one right. So he's number one in missed tackles forced so far. That's crazy for a rookie. We knew he was athletic. People kind of worried about his competition at Bowling Green coming out, in the draft. So they were like, can he really play with the big boys? He's shown that he can. He's making NFL athletes miss consistently. And so that's why he leads the league here. We're going to pop up my graphic real quick. And you're going to see Kyle Pitts is back from bye this week. He is going up against Buffalo, which is the second-ranked defense against tight ends, which is why he's on the lower end of this spectrum here. He's at 93, almost 94% route participation, guys, and he's got a 1.58 yards per route run. So we were talking about all those stats and how they kind of translate around. You can see Kyle Pitts is being utilized in the passing game a lot more this year at a higher clip. He's being more efficient, and he's still – with one less game coming off by last week, he's still the tight end 13. And let me go and look. So he's tight end 13 at 36.5 points in half PPR. Juwan Johnson is the tight end 12 at 40.1 points. So he's only 4 points behind Mr. Juwan Johnson to crack the top 12 here. And speaking of Juwan Johnson, he is going to lead off our tier 4 here. So this category are the guys that I typically view as streamers. I still have them ranked in the order I would most likely start them this week. You'll see here, if you don't know who this gentleman is on the graphic, that is Mr. A.J. Barner from Seattle, and you need to learn his name very quickly. He is currently the tight end 8 on the season, I believe. He sure is in half PPR formats. He finished with 2 touchdowns last week, 7 catches for 53 yards. He's being used a lot in the Seattle offense, and the Seattle offense is a whole lot better than I think we all expected. With DK departing, Sam Darnold coming in, we were going to see how he looked without the Kevin O'Connell system. He's still thriving here in Seattle. So A.J. Barner is a good play. He seems to kind of be in that second target role behind JSN. They keep sprinkling things around between Cooper Kupp and Torrey Horton and A.J. Barner. But Barner's continue to have a good year this year. He does have 4 touchdowns on the season, so he's being floated a little bit by touchdowns, with 2 of those coming last week, obviously. But we will see if those trends can continue. The name that's dropped the most and probably the most eye-catching here is Juwan Johnson, but it's not for the reason you think. So Juwan Johnson is going up against New England this week. 30th ranked defense against tight ends. He only had 2 catches for 17 yards last week. Now, why are we bringing up Juwan Johnson? Why is he falling down so far? And most people probably think, oh, it's because Taysom Hill got involved. It's because Foster Moreau got involved. Psych. No, they didn't. They were involved maybe in other ways, but they did not take away from his receiving role. Really what hurt them the most was, if you remember last week, the Saints, or it may even been Spencer Rattler, come out and he said, we're going to be more aggressive this week. And you saw that on the field this past week. He was not checking it down as much as he was with Juwan Johnson. That's why he only had 4 targets. And off of that, you also saw Shaheed have a bomb touchdown last week. That was probably one of the first weeks he's been relevant all year. So there are different reasons as to why he is here other than Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau coming back, from their IR and pup stints, all of those. So for me personally, I'm still willing to throw Jawan Johnson in there because until I see his workload diminish in lieu of those two, like them actually taking his receiving work, I'm going to continue to start Jawan Johnson. He's third in targets all season. He's being used in the slot almost 48% of the time with a 1.29 yards per route run. I'm really not that concerned right now. I have him in the streaming category because he also has a little bit of an ankle injury. He was limited at practice on Wednesday. So that's enough for me to knock him down here. The next guy you see on the list is Mason Taylor. We're going to blitz some of these guys real quick. But Mason Taylor plays Denver this week, 8th best defense against tight end. He had 12 targets last week, guys. If you need a safe floor, I think Mason Taylor is a very good streaming option for you this week. 9 catches on 12 targets for 67 yards. That's great, especially in half PPR formats. That's a little over 10 points. So you really want to take that where you can. He's tied for 11th in targets with Laporta and Tonjes, which Tonjes is down there a little bit. You need to monitor Kittle's news with him. We'll get to him in a second. But he is very interesting, to say the least. Keep him in your consideration for a streamer. You've got Goddard here. He faces the Giants. Not necessarily a great matchup. It's a short week for them, going into the Thursday night game. But he's being used on 90% of their passing routes. And he's being used almost 55% in the slot. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the usage. Maybe he continues that. He continues to find the end zone. He's also got 4 touchdowns. So if that offense keeps targeting him and keeps using him the same, he could easily repeat another performance and maybe even step it up just a little bit from last week. The biggest goose probably from last week would be Zach Ertz. And I can't fault you for being upset because I think everybody and their mother and brother and the rest of their family all thought Zach Ertz was going to have a great game because Terry McLaurin was out. Debo was somewhat limited throughout practice all week last week, and we didn't even know if he was going to play until later on in the week. And so we were all like, oh, Zach Ertz is going to be the number one target. He's been used all year. Boy, were we wrong. He got goosed. It was 0 catches on 1 target, didn't do anything, and he's still the tight end 14 on the year. I think everybody, especially in this category, they all have a chance to have a dud game. We didn't see that coming from Zach Ertz, but I'm willing to throw him back out there. I think that will be an outlier on the season. A name that I haven't been super high on throughout the year has been Jake Tonjes, and that's because, we've got to this point where Mac Jones is a starter. The rest of their offense is out, and really they only have Christian McCaffrey and Jake Tonjes. That's who's been their driving factor here recently, and it's kind of wild. You've got Ricky Pearsall that's been missing. You've got, obviously, Purdy that's been out with Mac Jones starting, and Mac Jones has looked fantastic. You also have had Jawan Jennings, too, kind of hit or miss. He'll play one week. He's been out. He's looking like maybe he's going to play again this week. So just keep an eye on Jake Tonjes again. If those guys are out and Kittle hasn't come back from IR, which is unlikely, Shanahan has already said, he's probably more likely looking at next week instead of this coming week. So just look out for him. He's a very fine play to stream. He may still be available on your waiver wire there. And so, for me, that's where I'm starting right now. Theo Johnson, Mark Andrews, Chig, all those guys are down here. I'm not really going to talk about them too much. We'll get into Theo Johnson just because he had 2 touchdowns last week. He does play Philly this week, like I said, on Thursday night. So I don't anticipate that, to be great. He's got an almost 80% route percentage being used. So somebody who's going to be on the field, but I'm not looking at a huge week from him, right? So these lower tier guys, Andrews obviously has Isaiah likely concerns. You've got Chig there, who the Titans offense until last week, whenever the Cardinals might have given up the worst loss ever in the history of the franchise, whenever they made the Tennessee Titans offense look competent, he's still down here. Evan Ingram finally showed up last week. He finally got in the end zone. We'll see if that continues. Colston Loveland taking on Washington this week. It will be interesting. I think that could be a good game, going back to the Hail Mary of last year. So I think they're looking for some revenge. Maybe they use him a little bit. And then I have Tommy Tremble on here again. I know he did not have a great game last week, and I talked about him as far as being a possible stream of the week, and that's because of the targets they had. At the tight end position last week had not last week in terms of this past week's games, but the week before he played last week, they had like 12 targets, 2 touchdowns for the Panthers. I was like, hey, look, if you need somebody, you're in the depths, you can go play Tommy Tremble, and it did not work out this past week. If I'm not mistaken, I think the other tight end actually is the one that ended up doing anything last week. Yeah, Tommy Tremble had 1 catch last week, guys. So it's very limited involvement. I was kind of chasing the targets, trying to give you a little bit of an upside case. Did not work out. But he's still somebody to consider. Like I said, Carolina, they are playing Dallas, so Dallas's defense is bad as well. Maybe the Panthers can get something going this week against the Dallas defense. Maybe it'll be a little bit closer than we anticipate. But that's my top 24 rankings on the week this year, guys. We'll see how it kind of shakes out. I feel like I've had a pretty decent, percentage gotten right so far. It's just some of these tight ends, man, when you get to a certain point, you're really just banking on a touchdown or some sort of like big play. That can vary week to week. Touchdowns are very unpredictable. That's the reason why on all these betting sites, DraftKings, everything like that, they have these crazy odds, especially if you stack a bunch together. It's hard to predict, right? If your favorite guys, they might be minus 100 or something, right? Your Christian McCaffreys of the world and all that. But even some of your better players may be, +1, +200. And that's because it's hard to predict, right? So when you get to that last tier, streamers, you're just looking for usage. You're looking for touchdown upside. All those guys, just kind of weigh your options. Hopefully you got somebody good off your waivers, or if any of these guys are here and maybe not somebody you already have, take a look. Just kind of throw some comments down below if you've got some questions as well. Obviously, follow us here on the Face Off Sports Network. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We do these videos every week. We have multiple other content out. We get defensive, kicker rankings. You also get quarterbacks, wide receivers, running back rankings. We have the whole gambit here. We also usually have several live streams a week. We have a few on Sunday morning as well, kind of getting you prepped and ready for the games. And so those will be kicked off early, especially as we have these overseas games that start at like 9:30. We've been going pretty early, around 8:30. So feel free to join in. We look forward to seeing you there. And other than that, guys, I look forward to seeing you next week, and peace.